Chapter 3. So, you want to create a podcast. According to Podcast Index, a research group, there were more than 4,406,236 podcasts as of January 2025. And you want to bring that total to 4,406,237? Before you rush out to purchase a podcast startup kit, of which there are many available online, you'll want to consider several questions. The clarity of your answers will help determine what type of podcast is best for you. Personal versus professional. First, some people want to personally express themselves online, connect with like-minded people, and have fun. You might want to talk about your passions and hobbies, such as cooking and sharing recipes, or talking about small business issues in your local community. Others hope to develop new skills, such as learning audio editing software or public speaking. Some might even want to beef up their CVs and online profiles. In contrast, the professional podcast falls mainly into two categories. One, creating a podcast on behalf of someone else or some organization. And two, associating the podcast with what you do professionally. Some people excel at creating and packaging content for others. And if you were one of these people, this area of professional podcasts represents potential revenue generation, that is, monetization, which we will explore in more detail later. The other type of professional podcast is the company podcast, the audio version of the corporate blog, so to speak. This can be internal or external. The corporate official could be speaking to employees and associates. The rise of remote work arrangements is perfectly suited for a professional internal podcast. Not only is the spoken word often more engaging, the internal podcast can help remote employees and associates feel connected and more aligned with their corporate leadership. The ease of production and distribution is also appealing for those people considering an internal professional podcast. The key to a successful podcast of this type is aligning the content and messaging with what employees find valuable. Regular podcasts of this type can also reduce the need and costs associated with periodic corporate training days, where vast bulks of information and content, quite often too vast, are presented internally to employees and associates, say at an annual staff conference. The internal podcast can replace part of that exercise. And these often work far more effectively. The audience of the corporate podcast could also be external customers. This could be delivered from the office of the CEO, the elected official, or the business owner. The key here is creating something compelling to the extent that your listener wants to hear you again. In other words, that listener chooses to subscribe. Later sections explore different types of engaging content. So we have personal podcasts and professional or work-related podcasts. It's important to note at this point that both can be monetized. Advertising revenues from podcasts now exceed $1 billion. Those are US dollars. And the trajectory of ad revenues continues to increase. We'll consider monetization and advertising revenue later. For now, it is useful to start considering whether your podcast will be mainly personal or mainly professional. Another type of podcast that stands out from those discussed above is the celebrity show. Celebrity status, whether global, national, or local, is increasingly accompanied by attempts to extend the life of the persona or monetize through book publications, televised talk shows, and public speaking appearances. The podcast has also become a tool for extending celebrity. This type of podcast is part personal and part professional. Its defining feature is the existence of a brand that preceded the podcast. From famous movie actors, retired sports personalities, former radio DJs themselves, to individuals who, for whatever reason, enjoy a notable degree of fame and/or notoriety. The celebrity podcast works from an existing level of name and brand awareness among the public. And while this type of podcast tends to stand out among the other types, the celebrity podcast, and indeed the celebrity himself, must be engaging to listeners to the extent that return customers are generated. The term celebrity is not used in the more current confining connotation of the word. Instead, the use of the term celebrity here sources its etymology, specifically of one who has a notable or public reputation, which could be a town mayor, a well-known local police officer, a real estate agent whose advertising adorns the park benches and local newspapers, or the owner of your neighborhood Luke's Diner. One final consideration on first principles. Is a podcast the most suitable medium for what you want to share online? As attractive as the prospects might be for someone imagining herself as a star behind the microphone, not to mention how fun it might be to make your home office look like a recording studio, there might be other mediums more suitable for you. Is your content primarily visual? Are you sharing a significant amount of information that requires the listener to make notes? While video podcasts are becoming much more popular, visual content might be better suited for a video presentation and to a visual medium such as YouTube, TikTok, or Dailymotion. Additionally, there are some podcast listeners who enjoy content away from their homes, in their cars, for example. If your target audience happens to be in that segment, then including information that requires manual transcription, such as get a pen and write down this address or phone number, isn't necessarily optimum for a podcast. Know what you want to say and why you want to say it. Upwards of 75% of podcast listeners report that they listen to podcasts to learn new things. The significant mass of users, then, see this medium as informative and educational more than they see it as entertaining. That said, the percentage of listeners who look for entertainment value in their choice of podcasts is also notable. Are you diving in to entertain or to inform? Is the information in your podcasts strictly your own opinion and slanted as a rant? Or do you intend to present a more balanced perspective that allows the listener to draw conclusions? A good exercise that I've used with clients is to have them write out the trajectory of a potential episode, putting together a draft script, so to speak. After that, attempt to identify the topic of your next episode. Without scripting that second one out, are you at this point able to assign 3 to 6 words that describe your podcast? In other words, can you encapsulate the essence of what you want to say and why you want to say it in a pin-back lapel button? If you can't, odds are the focus is still somewhat hazy. How often do you want to publish episodes? Like any content, a return visitor or customer expects to see and experience something fresh on a fairly regular basis. If there isn't any new content after, let's say, 2 weeks, you've likely lost that person. In a sense, this is also true for e-commerce websites, as well as bricks and mortar retail locations. While a return customer does not want to be alienated by constant reorganization of products, that is, a degree of familiarity must be foundational, a return customer expects something fresh. The average listener subscribes to approximately 6 shows, and that person listens to podcast content on average 7 times per week. The average listener consumes about 7 hours of listening time per week. Do you intend to be part of that listening pattern? If you do, your podcast station or hosting website will need new content on a regular basis. This is a commitment that podcasters need to make. Otherwise, they risk losing listeners and diminishing the base of potential engagement. We'll talk more about podcast content and publishing times and frequencies later on. What is your podcast personality? In other words, what is your brand? While this can evolve, and it doesn't always have to be firmly established at the beginning, adjusting your podcast's personality or brand is more difficult later in the process. At the very least, attempt to identify ideally who you are in the podcast listings, and more importantly, who you are in the listener's mind. Are you an expert in some given field, be it a volunteer soccer coach or an experienced, loving mother and homeworker? Do you like to lecture, bitch, or complain, or rant? Are you soft-spoken, or rather loquacious? Are you at your best when engaged in conversation with others, or as a solo act? One of the advantages of known personality and celebrity podcasts is that at least some key segment of the listening public knows who the person is, or at least who they think they know who the person is, which transfers relatively easily into podcast branding. Even without celebrity, though, everyone has something to say. Most podcast listeners want to learn and be informed. So try and establish who you are and what your podcast is before you turn on the microphone. Do you have an existing infrastructure of online and traditional properties and related assets? It is important to take inventory in the early stages of development. In other words, are there any, and if so, how many, websites or apps that are associated with you or your company? Do you distribute a personal and corporate newsletter? Do you have any existing promotion and advertising, be that in hard copy flyers, direct mail, radio, or television spots, window banners, billboards, and the like? Harness these properties to their fullest. While there are many excellent distribution platforms for your podcast, your existing infrastructure can serve as a home market foundation for your podcast. Wherever possible and appropriate, consider revising the message in each and incorporating your podcast in some way. This infrastructure is the footprint of your brand. In part, it tells you how big your brand is. Perhaps you have an online blog wherein you share recipes based on your love of, say, Southern-style cooking. You now want to talk about your experiences in cooking and to perhaps include an interview with a guest. Wherever your blog is hosted, it will have a basic feed that shares a notification of updates for subscribers. You might even have a separate email list or a Messenger and Facebook roster of contacts. If you're really on the ball, so to speak, you would also regularly post photos of your culinary creations on, say, Instagram or Pinterest, perhaps even Blue Sky. This is your starting infrastructure. This infrastructure, and all the users it entails and engages, is what you need to build from. Letting your users know that you have a podcast, that you have something to say, and you are now behind the live mic. This existing infrastructure is also your basis for improved engagement, monetization, and growth. Do you hope for any level of active user engagement? One should hope so, given the tools and applications available to content creators in the 21st century. While there is a degree of user engagement through podcast and streaming platforms, the engagement also tends to occur in your base infrastructure. Promoting an upcoming episode through Twitter, Instagram, or Reddit, for example, implicitly invites people to like or comment, to share or repost. Complementary user engagement in apps like these can help build your listener base by reinforcing a dedicated following of listeners or consumers or customers. If your podcast is monetized, active user engagement through your base infrastructure can also heighten the potential for revenue generation. At least half of podcast listeners state they are somewhat more likely to consider buying a brand after hearing it advertised on one of their favorite podcasts. Do you have a budget? Planning and ultimately publishing your podcast require both financial resources and time. Both need to be budgeted. If your podcast is strictly personal and more of a hobby, a simple startup kit of hard equipment typically does not exceed $100, and many instances can be substantially lower. The do-it-yourself or DIY podcast for personal purposes has many free tools available. Creation tools and apps, publishing platforms, and distribution services can all be free of charge. Even the more sophisticated DIY audio engineering software, alternatively known as digital audio workstations, such as Audacity, is open-sourced and can be obtained without any cost. Several basic websites and blogs at this level of podcasting can be free, and some are even customized with RSS feeds from your podcasting platform, providing for automatic episodic updates and transcription. One can even record, create, edit, and publish a podcast today through the microphone in a smartphone. More sophisticated podcasting can run much higher than $100, sometimes entailing recurring production and editing fees, studio fees, hosting or distribution fees. Some former radio and studio staff have transitioned their services to podcasting. These can have a measurably higher level of sound quality and certainly eliminate the time required in producing, editing, and publishing. The takeaway here focuses on determining how much time you want to or can dedicate to creating and maintaining your podcast, as well as paying a third party to putting it all together, or procuring the relatively simple equipment required and operating from your home or your office. Will video factor into your decisions to build your podcast? Video podcasting is the newest craze in podcasting. In fact, people are now referencing the popular 1980s song, slightly modifying it, and claiming that video will kill the podcast star. Such forecasts, I think, are premature. However, it is undeniable that video has a place in the world of podcasting. Video podcasting occurs at an intersection where new technologies are meeting listener demand and consumption habits. And certainly Spotify and YouTube have been the champions of facilitating video podcasting. But first, let's consider how video and podcasting even became a thing. None of us would likely even consider video podcasting if it weren't for the development of the RSS feed, which we spoke about in Chapter 2. That technology was groundbreaking. It served as a distribution channel for audio content. Some earlier innovations in the RSS feed resulted from experimentation with online video content, something referred to in some circles as vodcasts. Yet one is hard-pressed to explain today's viability of video podcasting without mentioning YouTube. Video blogs and related video content, published to a user's channel, form the basis of what are now called video podcasts. But it was YouTube's expansion into the world of audio podcasting and its adoption of the RSS feed that allowed the distribution channels to exist, channels that would place newly published content directly in a subscriber's hands. While there are platforms that specialize in video podcasting, whereby someone can produce video episodes and publish such content, employing the use of the RSS feed to place that content directly in a user's hand, it was the integration of video capabilities into Spotify's podcasting platform that turbocharged the growth of this medium. Video podcasting is really quite simple when using your Spotify for Creators account. All you do is ensure compatibility of your video content, that is, the video size, length, etc., and create a new episode. Users on Spotify can enjoy the audio-only experience or the full video podcast. For those platforms that are audio exclusive, users can still enjoy the full audio content of the episode without the video. Of the many podcasts produced by Henley Point, we have published several video podcasts to Spotify for Creators, content that typically features speeches, town hall meetings, or discussion forums. The video content in our examples is not fast-paced with rapid movement, but it does nevertheless allow the user to enjoy a more fulsome experience. Producing a video podcast a few years ago required a higher degree of technical acumen as well as a greater commitment of time needed for editing and post-production. However, with the ongoing improvements in camera technology, even in our phones, and the editing applications available online, the production of video podcasts is easier than ever, a trend that one would expect to continue. Depending on the podcaster's format and focus of content, video podcasts can offer greater depth and reach. For example, documentary formats and educational material are ideal for video podcasts. Complementary footage can include graphic content and even animations. All of this can lead to increased engagement. Video offers an increased dimension to the podcast experience vis-a-vis facial expressions and body language, all of which facilitate a stronger connection between user and content. Of course, expanded reach through YouTube is an appealing factor for many podcasters considering a video component. Not only can YouTube attract viewers who are not natural consumers of podcasts, certain social media such as Facebook more naturally connect a user. Video podcasts are, at least at this point, more easily shared on social media. Facebook, as one example, is a primarily visual platform, hence the complementarity and potentially expanded reach of the video podcast. Will video factor into your decisions to build a podcast? In addressing this question, one should above all have a healthy appreciation of the content being created and shared. Some content is more suited to a visual medium, while others are strictly oral. In most instances, and under most circumstances, the consumption of video podcasting, say while driving, is both risky and not feasible. Producing a video podcast for a program that attracts listeners in cars demands an understanding of how the content can be produced for both visual and oral mediums without taking anything away from each other. For example, a heavy use of animations or B-roll footage will likely not communicate well with the video component. Like any form of content creation, know what you want to say and how you want to say it. It is also critical to understand how and where your audience consumes your content. The growth of video podcasting will continue only if supported by new technological innovations, changing media consumption habits, as well as the commitment, appreciation, and applied creativity energy of content creators. We'll explore more about video podcasting in a later chapter that focuses on future trends. As you move forward, remember that everything is about integration. All your existing efforts and commitments, for example, your blogs, video content, newsletters, or paid advertising, must work in harmony, not only with each other, but with your podcast. Too many companies still do not fully appreciate the importance of content and promotional harmony. Without a seamless integration of the properties in your foundation, you likely are foregoing significant opportunity of distribution, user engagement, and overall growth.
Podcasting Explained, the audiobook, is a production of Henley Point. For more information visit henleypoint.ca.